Hello, my name's Bruce Snell. How you doing? Today we're going to be talking about fear, which is Class 1, Part 1 of our ABS certificate program. I'd kind of like to give you a little background of where we evolved and how we kind of got started in this stuff. Literally, if you look at it, I have been working for probably the last 11 years going into companies and trying to figure out all these issues internally that were having to keep us from being productive. We literally got started. We were the guys that were sitting in the back of the training or in the class and saying, how do we take what we've learned and apply it to our business, or giving us the skills to improve our business. Literally, we started with a couple of companies, and over a 7-year period, we started formalizing the program from one organization to the next. And we started seeing a consistency in each one of these organizations, and all these consistencies are what we call the 4 barriers to quality. And the 4 barriers to quality kind of evolved through actual working conditions and how in the heck we were doing business and the problems that we were addressing at the workplace. So if you look at the ABS, is really about base skills. What we're going to be talking about today, the fear, is that we're saying that through this ABS Applied Business Science program, that we need every employee internally within the organization need these base skills for continuance and growth. So if you'll look at, everybody has a handout, and let's look at our page 1. And our page 1 is basically a pre-workshop audit. All right, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask everybody here to be kind of honest with themselves and with their organization. We're going to ask you to go through this workshop, literally go through and mark 15 concerns of yours. And I want you to not necessarily think that it's in my department, but I want you to look and feel for the whole organization. What are the things that the organization as a whole are the 15 concerns? And then I want you to go back in this and go back and circle the top 5. So I'd like for you to take this after class and take it back through the organization, get everyone to give you the audit and bring it back. And what you're going to see of what we're talking about in this ABS program is how we're going to address these issues. Because again, this whole thing of applied business science is being able to take what we've learned and apply it in work under actual working conditions. So that's the pre-workshop audit. Now if you'll look at page 2, page 2 is our executive summary. And if you look at our executive summary here, 98% of the problems in an organization fall into the 4 barriers to quality. And it was interesting, as we were going through these, as the organizations got bigger, we were trying to figure out what the consistency or what those issues were that we could simplify in the company. Because as we got started, we started listing all the problems in an organization. And then I'm trying to look at those and say, what do all of those things have in common? Over about an 8 or 9 month period, we started grouping them and kind of putting the ones that had the same characteristics, and that's where the 4 barriers came about. In fact, we used to call that the 4 problem areas, but we had some marketing guys that thought that was a little negative and called it the 4 barriers to quality. And what's interesting is that all 4 of these barriers, and that's what you're going to learn here today, are interrelated. We can't go from, say, I'm just going to take this, we call it barrier picking, that I'm just going to take this barrier, I don't need the fear, I don't need the training, but we need written procedure and communication. So what you're going to see is how these 4 barriers, you can't do one without the other successfully. And then we're saying we have to motivate to change the way that we're doing business. That's really interesting. We have to move the organization, and we have to move ourselves and our departments on change. And change is really tough internally within the organization. And it has to be with the leadership. The leadership in the organization has to basically take the direction of change and how we're going to do that. The problem with most of the stuff out there is that our management and our basically educational and training industry hadn't supplied us with a system. It's like once one of those guys, those entrepreneurs that would figure it out, would kind of learn it, be a success, and then it was like it was forgotten. And I saw all of us recreating the wheel. I'm sorry, not recreating, but recreating the wheel. Communication without fear of appraisal. What we've got to do is look at being able to communicate and talk about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the issues that we're addressing internally without fear, like somebody coming back in what we call blackball. Like all of a sudden I got a great idea and I speak up, and then I end up on graveyard shift. That's what we're calling fear of appraisal. And it says most employees really want to do a good job. Very few employees get up in the morning and say, you know, I'm going to go to work and I'm just going to create havoc on everybody's life. We have found statistically that 99% of our people are good people and really want to do a good job. So again, most people do want to do a good job. And then if we look at building business infrastructure, if you'll turn to page 3. Okay, now this is kind of interesting here, page 3. We're saying in order to eliminate the 4 barriers to quality and get the organization and its employees positioned for continuance and growth, these are kind of the core things that we have to work on in an organization. And if you look at it, one is the organizational structure. The organizational structure is that we all say we have an organizational chart, flow chart, whatever you want to call it. And what you'll see from when you hit the button and pull it up on the computer, it really looks a lot different than what it actually is on the floor. What you'll see as the organization has grown, people are changing, departments are changing, and the person you thought was in a department's in a whole nother department, and their job don't even reflect. So one of the issues that we talk about is that first thing we got to do is agree on the organizational structure. How we came about that is that we were like all the other guys 11, 12 years ago, and that was we went into a company and started brainstorming for problems, because that's what we were told to do. As we got in and started brainstorming for problems, and I'm sure all of you have been in this situation, you bring up the problem, we start talking about it and start addressing it, and then all of a sudden we're creating 10 other problems. And a lot of them had to do with we didn't know who we basically reported to, and or who was responsible for that particular process that we were dealing with. So it's up front, we found that we started kind of going backwards, and we're saying, man, before we can ever get out and start solving problems, we got to start with defining the organizational structure, because that's going to start surfacing some issues. Because as the organization grows, and we call it an informal organization, there's little pockets of, we're not saying, I guess, power structures, but they're things that start happening internally within the organization of accountability. So we're saying, okay, we organize the organizational structure, and then we want to look at breaking it down by what we call the work centers. And literally the work centers is start pulling the organization, because that's going to help define your structure. And a lot of times we can't understand who does what or where or what department. So we're saying if your organization is a little tough or a little larger, just start putting people down and listing those people, and then start listing their jobs. And you're going to find that this in itself is going to be a heck of a lot of work for us to formalize those work centers. So we're taking this huge organization up, breaking it up by basically levels and or departments, and then we're looking at, within those departments, looking at these work centers. We're looking at teams. Now, the reason we have to break the organization up into teams is because the best person to tell you how to do the job is the guy doing the job. So if we have everybody in the organization that has the same job or a relationship of what we call I guess what we call internal customer and supplier, then they're related, and so they kind of understand what each one does. So we need to break the organization up in the teams okay, because this is how we're going to address moving an informal to a formal organization. So we need to look at the structure, breaking it up by work centers, looking at the teams and developing the teams and the base work centers that have like or internal supplier and customer relationships. And then we want to look at the base work centers. And that's another really interesting thing, is the base work centers. If you look at, I don't know how many of y'all have ever heard of a job description, but it's really interesting. The job description is very vague and it doesn't tell you anything at all on how in the world to do the job. So what we're saying the base work center is that that person's area of expertise and control, the center of their work, their base work center, the foundation of what they do, because they also do what we call additional duties, and they're daily, weekly, monthly, and as needed. All right, let's kind of step back and look at this. We're looking at now moving the organization. How in the world do we define it? What we do is that we look at the systems, start trying to lay it out, then we start looking at the work centers internally, then we start breaking the organization up in the teams, then we start looking at the team members, getting them familiar with how we're doing business, then we start formalizing those base work centers, and then we look at also the 4 problem-solving processes. The 4 problem-solving processes is literally how we address problems internally within the organization. And the informal organization, as we start formalizing this, starts bringing up a lot of different problems, and a lot of them have to do with process as well as the 4 barriers to quality. So now let's look at the next thing is that we have to look at task teams. And the task teams are literally the teams that can function outside of the regular team structure. But the task teams, I'm sure a lot of people here have heard of project management or strategic planning or stuff like that. Really, all that is a task team. And so what we've got to do is look at breaking this thing up, given the skills of task teams to where we can function in our jobs as well as be able to function outside of our jobs and outside of our departments in a task team. So these are the skills that we need to have as a task team. Then we're saying that's how in the world that we're going to continually improve the way that we're doing business, what we call continuous improvement. So let's look at this executive summary, these key points that we've talked about now. What we want to do is we want to define the organizational structure. These are minimum requirements that we have to do. Then in turn, we're going to have to turn around and look at those work centers that are within that organizational structure. Then we're going to have to look at and break up those work centers into teams, the people that kind of have the same jobs and they have what we call internal supplier and customer relationships. Then we want to look at, as we start formalizing those work centers, they now become what we call base work centers, the base, the foundation, the center of your work. We start formalizing each individual internally within that organization in that base work center. Then they also have additional duties, daily, weekly, monthly, and as needed. Then we give them problem-solving skills. Then we give them task team skills. That's how we can continuously improve. The interesting thing of what we're talking about, the continuous improvement. Now, what we've talked about, all this stuff, this is why we're saying that these are base skills that all employees internally within the organization and all levels have to have, because this is what it's going to take to move an organization from an informal to a formal organization. We have to have these base skills in order to break the organization apart, define it, and have the skills to task team it, problem solve it, and continually improve the way that we're doing business. Because again, what we're saying is that the people are only as good as their training. So let's look at now page number 4. And page number 4 is the kind of our philosophy. Because it was really interesting as we got through this, we're looking at, okay, well, what is our philosophy? And our philosophy is that, and this is proven over the last 11 years, that 99% of our people are good people and want to do a good job. Very few people get up to work, as I said earlier, and want to go and wreak havoc on the organization. We also believe that the worker is only as good as their training. So if you're looking at it, that we have a tendency to harp that they don't care, that they're just there to collect a paycheck. The employee is only as good as their training. And it's the organizational's responsibility to give that training. The informed worker becomes what we call fulfilled, motivated, internationally competitive. Because if they're feeling a part of that organization and they're having say-so and the responsibility of their job and of their base work center, they're going to feel like they belong on this thing. If you look at the, again on page 4, the building of the business infrastructure. Man, the building of the business infrastructure is really all of this stuff that we're doing internally within the organization, building all these systems and all this base skills of people and process. And in that, as we started looking at these problems that we were addressing, it was a strange thing. We started coming across issues that were not necessarily a process, but had to do with interpersonal issues. We call it somebody being mean to you at the water cooler, that giving you what we call, again, that go to hello look. Well, how in the world do you address that? We call it our base values concept. And the base values concept is that the base values are the way that we conduct ourselves internally within that organization. And the base values are supported by our 2 rules: do what's morally and ethically correct, and treat everybody as you want to be treated. We're saying in order to eliminate the 4 barriers to quality, we systematically have to move through the organization with the relationship of these 4 barriers. And that is, we discovered, well, I'm gonna count them down for you again. 1 is fear, 2, lack of communication, 3, lack of written procedure, and 4 is lack of training. We realize you can't train until you have written procedure. You can't get that until you have open and honest communication. You can't get that until you remove the fear of expression or action. So if you look at this, that's how we systematically move through the 4 barriers to quality, which is kind of where the Base Work Systems 2000 evolved. That's the foundation of the curriculum that we've developed over these years for this applied business science. So that's kind of how we evolved, and that's kind of what we're talking about in our philosophy. We're saying the social impact for the worker, and it's really interesting, we call it equality of people and process. Really, the reason that we have inequality is because of lack of process or definition or holding accountable. So we're saying by creating process, we create equality of both people and process internally within the organization. Because most quality programs and the stuff that we've heard over this last decade is that we run down to the manufacturing floor and that's where we work on quality. We're saying, based off of our experience and what we've learned, is that the whole organization has to be involved in quality. And quality is not an option. And really, the only way that this thing's going to happen is that we have unconditional support and direction and leadership of management. Because the employees are powerless internally to make an impact on that organization. Now, if you'll look at page 5, and we call that business permutation, which is basically change, because what we're having to do, based off of what we discovered, is that we tried to do like everybody else and all the established way of doing it, and we just couldn't apply it to what we're doing. So we said, let's look at this change of the way that we need to be doing business. And we're saying how the Base Work Systems 2000 views the workplace. And that is that for every job there's a worker. And then for every worker there's a process and a step and a procedure. That job is what, again, we call the Base Work Center. And of all of that, you link those together, that creates the systems. And out of that, we have to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. Then we want to look at how in the world do we describe the workplace. If you look at it, they keep talking about the workplace as basically a bunch of people that don't care and that they're there, they're non-skilled, they're here just to collect a paycheck. And what we're saying is that our people is really only as good as their training. So I have discovered that we can go out and hire anybody with any kind of technical background or any kind of skill background, bring them into the organization. Well, they still have to fit into how the organization's doing business. And what I'm finding is is that so many are not defined that no matter who you got, you're not going to find that person that you're going to be able to bring in and fit right into your organization. There's just no way to do it with an informal organizational structure. And so we want to look at the breaking through the 4 barriers to quality down at the bottom there on page 5. And it says really, again, lost in all this mumbo jumbo is a thing called common sense and logic. We've tried, as we've talked about earlier, made this thing way too complicated, and it's not. If you look at the breaking through the 4 barriers to quality is really how we're going to build the infrastructure and how we're going to hold these 4 barriers to quality accountable. And if you look at it, again, you can't train till you have written procedure developed by the people doing the job. You can't get that until you have open and honest communication. You can't get that until you remove the fear of expression or action. So if you look at it, that's kind of what we're talking about in this business permutation of how we look at business and make it really more complicated than what it is. And now if you'll turn to page 6. And what's really interesting, it says all of us are processing some step of our organization's products and service of our order request. Now, what we're saying there, if you look at it, all of us here have some kind of product or service that we're really out there on the marketplace with. And if you look at that product or service, all of us internally are supporting that order request. An order is external, meaning somebody is buying our product. A request is internal. That is that we're getting a request internal from our internal customer or supplier. So we're saying that everybody in the organization, I don't care where you are, you're either supporting or processing some part of that order request. And that's really about as simple as it gets. And so you can call your job whatever, but we're all there to support that order request. And we're looking at the things we have to do about the manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. You look at the MPSM. Okay, if you look at that, it is we have to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. And everybody in the organization has to do this. It says things we do upon receipt of an order request. We have to meet the terms and the conditions of the order request, the action or event. We accomplish this through, we have to manage, coordinate of the actions and events of the MPSM. We have to plan, literally, how are we going to move this order request through the organization. We're going to have to schedule it, and we're going to have to schedule it with everybody in the organization. Then we're going to have to monitor it and the data collection and reporting of that order request. So again, if you look at it, we're looking at the manage, plan, schedule, and monitor everybody in the organization. We're looking at the undertaking of the MPSM are involved with the 4 M's, which we call manpower, machine, materials, and method. The manpower is actually who in the world is doing the job of the order request. The machine is what in the world are we going to use, and the material, what we need to use, and then the method, how in the world is it going to be done. So if you look at all the people in the base work centers have to have the managing, planning, scheduling, and monitoring skills in order to be productive and proactive internally within the organization. This is what we're talking about, base skills. If we don't have the base skills, one department, one base work center can be planned. If the other one's not, how good is their planning? And that's the same thing what we talk about training, is that if a manager is trained and he's delegating to an untrained workforce, how good is his training? If you look at now availabilities to process the order request of the product and service, we're saying that there has to be the capacities of the 4 M's and inventory, the existing and lead times. So in order to meet the demands of the organizations, we need to know what are those availabilities and the capacities of the 4 M's and inventory and existing lead times. Then next, data support. How do we manage and monitor all this stuff that's happening internally within the organization? We're saying that, first of all, we're going to have to download the stuff, and that's what we call database decisions. We have to move and make decisions with database decisions. And we're saying we give focus to the organization. The organization with data is now in a focus that we can manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. So that's what we're talking about, the data support. How do we manage and monitor the daily event and action of the organization? And most of this stuff that's happening in the organization is very informal. And there's not really a formalized system internally to do that. Let's look at our continuous improvement of our product and service dealing with data and not emotion. The start is good data for managing, planning, scheduling, monitoring. You've heard the thing that good data going in is good data coming out. So what we're saying is, how in the world are we going to continuously improve our order and our request, our product and service? Is that we're going to have to look at, with that data, the past data. Basically, the past was going to kind of give us a picture of what the company has done. The present is kind of where we at and are we on schedule. The projected is where are we going to go as an organization and a base work center. Then we need to look at, is it processed? How many of those things did we process? Did we meet projections? Did we stay within budget? So again, what we got to do is look at all the ways internally that we can manage, plan, schedule, and monitor by base work center throughout the organization. And if you'll look at, let's go to page 7. And page 7, we're kind of looking at the workplace profile. The workforce is made up of the following. If you really look at it, what in the world is all this stuff? Really, we have the people, which is the base work center. Then we look at the personalities, and we call it, for every 10 employees you got, you probably got 15 different personalities, depending on whatever particular their issue at work or at home, because what is happening at home is affecting us also at work, and we'll talk about that a little more. Then we have process, and that is the people that are doing the job. So let's look at, we're saying the workplace profile starts with the people, the base work centers, the personalities, kind of our habits, and then the process, the job the people are doing. Next, let's look at the procedure. So we got a process, now we want to look at the procedure, how to do the job. And we call it, there's a process, step, and procedure. Then we're looking at the systems. Really, if you look at it, we got the processes linked together by what we call internal supplier and customer creates the systems through the organization. That's why we have to break the thing up by base work centers, because we got to get everybody in their area of expertise and control involved in the process. Then out of all this stuff, we have to manage, plan, schedule, and monitor everything that we're doing in this profile. Again, I want to go over is that what we have to do is get these base skills throughout the organization that we can handle and manage, plan, schedule, and monitor our organization. Now, if you look at the 4 barriers to quality finding, if you'll kind of turn to page 8 in your books. Okay, page 8, the base work center permutation is the 4 barriers to quality findings. It's really interesting that is that our problem are really not our people are not the problem. The 4 barriers to quality, and we're saying encourage, don't shoot the messenger. And what we're saying here is that we want to step back with the 4 barriers to quality awareness, step back and say, number 1, is that a problem? Instead of going and beating somebody up, but we want to say, is that a problem because of fear of expression or action? Did that become a problem because that employee couldn't speak up? That employee didn't have the control or the support or the trust to fix whatever it was? And I think we see a lot of examples of that out there today. I guarantee you, everything that's going wrong internally within an organization, people know about it. It's the fear that keeps it suppressed throughout the organization. Because of lack of communication. Is it a problem because was the communication written? Was it understandable? Was the communication verbal? I guarantee if it's verbal, it's now due to interpretation. Then we're saying number 3, because of lack of written procedure. Was the problem because, was it written? Was it written by the person doing the job? And then if you do have procedure, we call them, there's a lot of manuals out there, we call them dust collecting manuals, is that look at when's the last time was that procedure updated. And so we're saying, is that procedure correct? Then we're going, is it because lack of training? We're saying the training of the person and of the process, because one without the other is not any good. We want to look at now the base values, promoting goodness in our workplace, the quality of life. If you look at the base values, what we're talking about, I'm going to have to read this. It took a while to write this particular paragraph here years ago. The foundation of principles and rules that determines conduct and habit, which in turn affect all employees' common welfare. The organization must hold and be held accountable of these base values. The underlying structure is built on the two rules. The two rules, we do what's morally and ethically correct, and we treat everybody as you want to be treated. I don't know about y'all, but that's kind of how I was brought up, basically by my mama and grandmama. And I'm sure almost everybody out there has heard those two rules someplace. So when you really get down to it, this is what we have to do internally within the organization. Because I know if we have all the procedure and we don't have the underlying values being supported in the organization, no matter what we do in the organization is short-lived. And we're not going to have a long-term success. And remember, again, that 99% of our people are good people and want to do a good job. If you'll look at now page number 9, it says our position on the workplace, our position on improvement. This is about how rocket scientists this stuff gets. We're saying, how can you improve when the systems are not defined? If you look at so much stuff that we start to do internally within a company, we go out, just like I was telling you we did 10 or 11 years ago, we went out, started brainstorming, and we haven't even defined the systems internally within the organization. It was like we were going backwards. So we're going, how in the world are you going to improve a system until it's defined? But it's an interesting thing. What we discovered is that by defining it, you improve it. Now, that's kind of a simple concept. What we've learned is that by getting the people that do the same job, the base work center, or have that relationship of internal supplier and customer, getting them together to come to a consensus agreement on how they're doing business, is that just by defining and doing that, you improve the system, because the systems internally within the organizations are informal. And when the 4 barriers are there, you're not only fighting an informal system, but you're fighting all the other stuff around that. Then we said the emphasis of people and process. If you look at it, all we're doing is processing our order request. Man, it can't get any more simpler than that. That's all that we're doing. I don't care if you're the CEO, the president, a department head, a city manager, a professor, a school teacher, whatever it is, all we're doing is supporting that order, that request of our product and our service. That's all we're doing. Base training program, organization-wide. And what we're saying is that the organization has to have a formal training program throughout the whole organization. I don't know about y'all, but most of the time that when we start training is after we've had a big problem. And usually that problem cost us some money. So all of a sudden now, we're pulling out and going, hey, we need to do some training. Well, now that it's been a problem, it's usually a little too late, and it's cost us a ton of money to fix that thing. And we're looking at, we all want to be, and we all want to belong and be a part of something. Most of us here don't belong to country clubs and have all this other stuff. We have our families and work, and most of our employees want to belong and be a part of something. And most employees want to be and belong to our organizations. The organizations have to allow that. And they'll wear the caps, they'll wear the jackets, they'll talk good, and your employees are your best salesmen. Leadership and the system for improvement. Management must have a system to lead the organization. That's what I really found was disturbing when I go into a company. It's like they're blaming these folks and these folks are blaming them, and then all of a sudden we're saying, okay, all the managers gather up. Okay, y'all need to change and fix the organization. What we didn't do was to give them a tool or a system to change, and most of the change is informal that starts looking at raising fear and chaos. So literally, what we have seen is that most of it's so informal, and with the chaos, we have 5 people, 5 managers, 5 leaders, going through and getting the same direction and doing 15 different things. And so it starts going in this direction here. And the leadership, the only way change is going to happen is for leadership to sign on and support the process. It sounds easy. Who doesn't want to have a quality organization? Who doesn't want to have money? Who doesn't want to have a nice retirement and be happy at work? Well, when you're battling with those 4 barriers to quality, it's easier said than done. That's why we're saying it's almost a jump of faith, unconditional support, that what we've got to do is move from an informal to a formal organization. And so we're saying that the management has to commit, and they have to have a system. It's our responsibility to give a system to management. And again, then we have to bring all the employees onto the organization. We're looking at now the 4 barriers to quality. If you look now on page 10, the 4 barriers to quality. Okay, this is kind of interesting here. If you look at problem, barrier number 1 is fear. And I used to get an argument that everyone's going, no, communication is our number 1 problem. I asked, well, why'd you say communication? Because you just paid $10,000 to have somebody come audit your company? And then they told you communication, and the CEO kind of laughed and said, well, yeah. I said, if you have fear, you're not going to have communication. So number 1 is fear. Number 2 is lack of communication, and that's verbal and or written, not communicating with one another. Then number 3 is lack of written procedure. Okay, most of our procedure internally within the organization is informal. It's evolved. All of a sudden, we kind of are doing a job. We kind of have some people that have the expertise, and all of a sudden the job has just evolved, and there's nothing in a written form, and that's fine. But what happens when we start having turnover or people start growing in the organization? How do we train and retrain, and then how do we cross-train? So we have to have that written procedure. Number 4 is lack of training. Is that most of our training in the organization of what we described is really informal. We usually train after the heck there's a problem. So if you look at this, the 4 barriers to quality, really 98% of the problems that we're addressing have to do with the 4 barriers to quality. Okay, we can have all this stuff done. We can do everything. And guys, this ain't like you go through this thing. This is continuous, and this is from here on out. And we have to continually reinforce that. And with our base values. And then if you look at it, our base values and the 2 rules. And you were warned that we're going to continually repeat this throughout the whole program, because that's as basic as it gets. We have to do the 2 rules. The underlying structure is built on the 2 rules. Do what's morally and ethically correct and treat everybody as you want to be treated. It's as simple as that. And a quality issue, well, how do we address all this stuff? Remember, most of the conflicts internally within the organization start as little bitty problems. And when there's a huge rigid system or no system to address conflict internally, these things start festering start as a little bitty problem and grow up, and then they blow up. And we're saying that a quality issue can be a violation of the 2 rules. It can be because of process, procedure, personality, or people. So if you look at this, the tough thing is these personality issues and this someone being mean to me issues. We know how to address that. And so what we're looking at is that internally within the organization, if it's a problem, if that employee feels that it's a problem and we have to address it. And this quality issue process is what we address that with. So if you look at, I'm going to kind of go over again the 4 barriers here, what we just covered. I want to look at, okay, what are the 4 barriers to quality? The 4 barriers are fear, lack of communication, lack of written procedure, and lack of training. What we did, we can't train till we have we can't train until we have written procedure developed by the people doing the job. We can't get that until we have open and honest communication, and we can't get that until we remove the fear of expression or action. And then the base values. Again, the base values, that's the foundation that we have to treat, in simpler terms, everybody with respect and dignity. No one can be exempt from quality. Then the 2 rules. Do what's morally and ethically correct and treat everybody as you want to be treated. Now, if you'll look at page 11, page 11 is the what we call the 6 supports of quality. I'm trying to keep all this stuff straight here. Okay, if you look at the 6 supports of quality, one of the things that we have to do is that we have to formalize the training program. You know, we have just talked about most of the training in the organization is really kind of informal. And then if you look at the informal training is that we train out of a reactive something of what has happened internally within the organization. So it usually costs us money, then all of a sudden we want to now put people and put them into training, and then all of a sudden we're saying that this is training, we're going to train here, and then it has no ending in sight or no continuity throughout the organization. So the 6 supports of quality are remove the fear of expression, open up communication, we must have written procedure, we have continuous training, we have to have leadership, and we have to have a concession to change. Now that's an interesting thing. What I'd like for us to do is kind of look at what we're saying here in this 6 supports of quality. Okay, the concession to change. Now, we're dealing currently with some pretty large organizations that it's easy to go to a seminar or to a meeting or go to the boardroom or have retreats or have our quarterly or annuallys, and we go out there and say, okay guys, we've been told we have to change. We have to change the way that we're doing business. It sounds good and it sounds simple, but what we're saying is that there has to be a concession to change. We have to yield change, and how we yield that is that we have to have the leadership of the organization literally taking the lead, doing what they say they're going to do, and have a system for that change. Because most of the change internally within an organization and in the country right now is kind of chaotic. And how we usually start is that reason we all of a sudden figure we got to change is either we're losing market share, cash flow, or our stock price is dropping. So all of a sudden now we got to change whatever it is that we're doing. And we're saying, how in the world are you going to change an informal organization? And it's unfair to load it on management and say, okay, we have to change. If you look at the concession to change in the leadership, you know, you hear it starts at the top with the sign-off. In a sense, that's exactly what has to happen. But also, too, what has to happen is that that person has to walk the walk and talk the talk. And in that leadership also has to have a system that they can manage, plan, schedule, and monitor. So we're looking at the leadership having a tool, and we call that, and there's a story in the book called A Tool of Change. Okay, so we're looking at the concession, the leadership, and the leadership is also taking place throughout the organization as this change is happening. Because you go in, even what we're talking about, it sounds great, you can go into a company and get everybody enthused about it, but there's very few people that are going to step up in the organization and become a part, mainly because they don't trust the organization. So if you look at the leadership will evolve throughout the organization. And you're going to see people that are going to step up that you would have thought would not step up. You're going to see people that start taking work home to have some, basically some task team stuff completed, have some procedure things done that will start task teams. We've actually had people in companies that started task teams that were frontline folks that involved several different departments that literally ended up having a tremendous impact. When one of the savings on and it happened to be the accounting department, was about $8,000 a month interest that we were losing because we weren't basically collecting the bills on time. And this person, frontline person, was basically getting their work late, that in turn they were late processing, then in turn late giving it to the other person, that in turn we were late billing. So it was costing us $8,000 a month in interest, and that's what we're talking about. Quality is not changing chaotic and going in there and just ripping the organization apart. And I love that term, re-engineering, that they come out with. I look at, how in the world can you re-engineer when you ain't even engineered what you're doing? Now think about that. So we're saying this change, the best way to change is start defining your organization. The best way to change is start giving your tools, the tools of change, to that organization for continuance and growth in these base skills throughout the organization. We're looking at removing the fear. You know, it really sounds pretty simple. Okay, guys, it was interesting. I went to one company and they're going, okay, we all went to this table and they're going, okay, we're going to do quality. So the guy started asking, which had been in some of our stuff years ago, and he's going, well, how are we going to do quality? He goes, oh, you know what we're talking about. We got to all do quality. Well, what quality? And he's going, hey, you're just being a pain. You know what we mean by quality. You know you got to do it right, and it has to be quality. Okay. So at this particular meeting, they had like 6 or 8 tables set up, and all of a sudden this guy stands up and goes, hey, we're through here with quality. So everybody jumps up. All these groups change tables, and now they're going over their human resource package, or now they're going over the new accounts payable. Now they're going over the basically our accounts receivable new software program. So now we're going down the road. They're going, hey, I told you that we had to have quality. Why aren't you doing it? So it's like what we call is that we internally within the organization usually get put into a position of where we get what we call 2 sharp sticks. And we go, okay, which one of these do you want me to poke in my eye? Because no matter what we do, it's going to hurt. So then what happens, I got my eye covered up, and you come and say, well, you're the one that did it, like I had a choice. So what happens, we put all these things on our organization that we don't need to. So the fear, what we've discovered, consistency promotes truth, that promotes trust. Then if we've got the fear working on, then we start opening up communication. And an easy way to start opening up communication is getting people to talk about their job. Everybody in the organization can describe their job. That was an interesting thing because in some of our organizations we had several people that were illiterate in both English and both in Spanish. And so what happened is that we realized that the folks that have either these learning disabilities or they're maybe totally illiterate, they usually know their jobs better than anybody else. And so as we started looking through, I realized instead of learning all this new terminology, the one thing that anybody in that organization could talk about was their job or their base work center. So what this did is that we were able to give people something comfortable to talk about, which was their job, plus a system to fix it. So by ending up having something that I felt comfortable to talk about, started opening up communication, that in turn started looking at moving that fear level down. Because the more we meet, the lower the fear. The more the communication, the lower the fear. And the more we communicate, the higher it gets. So then we're looking at the written procedure. Okay, we're saying the written procedure has to be developed by the people doing the job. They're the best ones to tell you. We have to give them a system to do that. Then we're looking at continuous training. So if you look at, we're going to take a break now. We're going to come back to look at barrier number 1, fear. And thank you.